You know what Dungeons and Dragons is, you know how to create a character, and you have an idea what you want to play. But what should you play as? This is going to be the start of that. Hello, I'm Kestrel McKnight,
And I'm Tim Gwen.
and this is Pillars of Adventuring, your first stop on any adventure. This is going to be a 2-week moderate deep dive into each race. We're not going to go super deep onto all of them. Give you a wee little bit of lore, the main populated races of Faerun this week, as well as dive into the 4 lesser populated races next week. I do both because they may be lesser populated in the game stories and lore, but in my experience, they're quite used frequently. Um, Feel free to use any backstory hooks or anything that we come through or to arrive at. But before we do get into that, it is sponsor time. We are sponsored by SwiftLifestyles.com. So SwiftLifestyles.com, if you're unaware and unfamiliar with them, they are a gamer nutrition company. Vitamins, minerals, and all the other fun stuff to keep you active, going, and top of your game, peak performance. They have vitamins, energy drinks, mixes, things like that. And one of my favorite things about them, and one of the reasons we partner with them, is you get to see all the nutrition facts on the website before you even buy a thing. Please don't eat the plastic cup. Not meant for that. You can go ahead and head on over to the website, clifflifestyles.com. There will be a link in the chat on the live stream, and we'll even send the link in the description of the YouTube when we get all this pulled up. If you use the coupon code KESTREL, that's KESTREL, you will get a 15% off the total order. Also, the other fun part, I am pleased to announce that we are starting up a Patreon. There will be a link below, patreon.com/pillars of adventuring. There are going to be levels for each different subscriber, as Patreon things do, including on the top end, you'll be getting set up and scheduling curated and hosted Dungeons and Dragons events, hosted by either myself or Tim, depending on how things allow. And if it gets super popular, we may even start hiring additional DMs for Pillars of Adventuring curated content. But at the very least, each and every individual patron of ours will get a shout out at the end of our videos. So check it out. You'll be glad you did. Now, back to our regularly scheduled broadcast.
Yes, so this is going to be based on the lore in the main books, as well as the lore building up to the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons. Wizards of the Coast have done a great job involving various authors and curating the world. Bringing fractured lore into something more cohesive and that will actually allow you to move forward in your storytelling.
And it's actually a fun little fact that I like to put in. Up until 3rd edition, there wasn't an official world of Dungeons and Dragons. It was just some nebulous medieval fantasy, loosely based on Tolkien lore. Faerun, the continent, and Toril, the world, was really introduced in Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. That's where a lot of the lore started coming in. And today we will be discussing how humans, dwarves, and elves and halflings fit into that today. Not necessarily in that order. So, a lot of this, it's a medium dive. There's a lot more to each one, and literally there could be a video about each race individually.
Mm-hmm.
For brevity and getting into the more mechanics of it, we're not going to dive into that. We're looking at doing some lore videos down the line, but right now we want to focus more on the practical part of it.
There you go.
Yeah. So, without further ado,
Let's start with humans. Humans are the most populated race in Faerun. Um, and understand there is no typical human. There are a broad spectrum, and um, they have an ability to fit in wherever they're needed. They are the youngest of the common races and also have shorter lifespans. Um, Due to this, many humans live a life of adventure and ambition, whereas dwarves, elves, halflings, and even dragons play a long game. Humans seem impatient by comparison. Um, Humans are viewed as innovators, achievers, and the pioneers of the world. Um, be this through their shorter lives or some need to prove themselves to the elder races is, well, I guess it's up for debate.
and as you mentioned, humans definitely are the most adaptable among the common races. They have wildly varying tastes, morals, and customs. Their nations vary as wildly. I can speak today, I promise. They can vary as wildly as the difference between the subraces of other races. Whereas you might have a singular dwarf or elf guarding a location for hundreds of years, humans instead found orders and organizations to accomplish the same task. That's actually why you will find a lot of the empires being run by humans instead of by other races. Elves, dwarves, their empires are generally tied to a individual, whereas humans, it's tied to a idea or a thought. Um, so, acknowledging their shorter lifespans, they focus these empires and on a legacy to cement their ambitions in the annals of history.
Right. The material culture and the physical characteristics in the Forgotten Realms are different in each of the major nations and states of the world of Tormel. Toril, sorry. I can speak today too. Um,
It's a
we
tough day.
can't we can't go over all of them because there is only so much time in a day. Um, we could, again, as with each of the races, we could do an episode on the cultures of each area. So what we'll talk about right now is just the mechanics of the humans instead of the cultural areas. This isn't to say that the cultural aspects aren't important to your character or backstory, just that that conversation is probably better in a one-on-one situation with specifics instead of generalization that we'll do here. Mainly talk to your DM, do a little bit of online research because Google is great for that. So
And there's even some within the player's guide itself. It gives you a good overview of general, like basically your brochure of a tourism guide for each little area, including some spots that aren't strictly in Faerun, but you still might encounter those characters in. Um, just for pure clarity, Faerun is the continent that majority of the games take place in. So the Sword Coast with Waterdeep, Neverwinter, Baldur's Gate, that's all in the continent of Faerun, and about 90% of all the official modules are going to be in that area. Um, Notable exceptions. Curse of Strahd is in Ravenloft, which is a demiplane, not exactly even part of the world, and the Tomb of Annihilation is on the island continent of Chult. So those are the two major exceptions. Almost every other one, it's there. But your human character has the following traits. Each ability score will increase by 1. So after you've rolled up the character stats like we talked about in the last session, add 1 to all of it. The human race will reach their adulthood in the late teens, like most of us are expected to. Not me, I'm still a child in my 30s. Humans don't have a particular alignment that they gravitate towards. Again, wildly varying race. They have the best and worst that life can offer among their ranks, like real life. Humans can vary widely in height and build, and regardless of your position on the spectrum, your creature size will be medium. Now, the human's base speed is 30 feet per round, and you can speak and write in Common, which should be thought of as whatever language you natively speak at your table. So if you speak Spanish, you speak Common. If you speak French, that's your Common. It's just that easy. You also get to learn one language of choice. Typically, it's a language of the species that they're most in contact with, and humans like to sprinkle in the words of the other languages to feel fancy or insult them.
It's true. Um, uh, there is my favorite type of human to play, and that's the variant human. Um, and you definitely want to clear this with your DM first if you want to play a variant human. They replace the human ability score increase trait, which allows you um, to mark everyone up, but they replace it so that you can select two different ability scores of your choice to increase by one. You also gain proficiency in one skill of choice, so you get an extra skill proficiency, um, and you gain a feat. And I'm sure we'll talk about feats later. Um, Feats are wonderful to have. Um, whenever I play them, I'm playing a sorcerer right now, and I chose the feat Spell Sniper because sorcerers are a wee bit squishy. So the Spell Sniper feat allows him to double his ranged spell attacks, which keeps him way on the back line. So I like it for the flavor, and I like it for the varying challenges that or advantages that you can have.
Yeah. If you're looking for a jack of all trades, the human is probably a good balance in there. If you're looking to refine that in a little more, the variant types, you still have that safe spot with the humans, but the variant type can really refine it more to what you want. Um, Now we're going to move into my favorite race, the elves. Most of the characters I play are either going to be an elf or a half elf. Um, just I like the culture. Elves are an innately magical race of otherworldly beauty and grace, living in the world but never really a part of it. They tend towards living in places of beauty that echoes their own, glittering palaces, deep forests, or ethereal caverns. Elves are often seen or descended from different monster races like the Eldarin or Fae. And elves love nature, magic, art, music, poetry. They tend to embrace the good aspects of the world. They're slender and graceful, usually weighing around 100 to 150 pounds, and standing between 5 to 6 feet tall. If they're over 6 feet, they're unusually tall elves.
They also tend to live multiple centuries, 7 to 1,000 years old in rare cases. This gives them a broad perspective on events that would trouble the shorter lived races. They are more often amused than excited, um, and more likely to be curious than greedy. They are temperate, rarely prone to extreme emotion. However, when they are adventuring or learning a new skill, they are focused and relentless. Elves are generally slow to make friends and enemies and slower to forget them. They respond to petty insults with disdain and serious insults with a little bit of vengeance.
I don't have to stretch very hard to roleplay an elf. It flows through me. Now, elves over the centuries have opted avoidance over conflict, which isn't to say it's exactly worked out for them, all in all. The human empires are almost exclusively built upon the bones of the Elvish Empire. Yet, remarkably, the elves harbor very little ill will towards the humans, recognizing their own folly for waiting out the reckless humans. Elves often just reclaim their lands when the short lived races fade out and die. But when the need arises, the elves are a martial force to be reckoned with, rivaling even the greatest armies that have walked the lands.
Elves actually um, take up adventuring mostly out of boredom and the desire to explore and quench their thirst for knowledge. For this, they tend toward careers that allow them to travel freely and don't like the routine that comes in human society, which is stagnant in the day to day but changes over the decades. Elves like change and freedom. So you'll see them frequently in rebellions and championing moral causes.
It's actually one of the reasons you'll see a lot of bandits will be mostly made of humans and elves because the elves like, hey, yeah, fight the man. You know,
Yes. And we were talking about alignment last time. Elves typically tend toward chaotic, which is the change. They want to see the change. Um, but as far as traits go now, elves get a +2 to dexterity. They reach physical maturity around the late teens, but the elven concept of adulthood is more likely to being adults around 100 years old. Um, the average elf lives to be around 750 years old, and some have been as old as 1,000. But those are really rare in all of the lore. Elves tend towards, like I said, the chaotic and good alignments, except for the dark elves, also known as the drow. They are evil more often than not, and we'll get into those probably a little shortly. They are medium sized, elves are medium sized creatures, as humans are, and they also have a base speed of 30. Um, you get a natural dark vision, which means that you can see in dim light within 60 feet as if it were bright, and darkness as if it were dim. So in darkness, the elf can't really tell the color of things, but it's still a pretty cool little detail. And you have keen senses, which gives you proficiency in perception. Elves are descended from the fairies or the fae, so you get an advantage on saving throws against charm, and you can't be put to sleep magically. And speaking of sleep, something really cool, elves don't need it. Elves instead go into what the humans call a trance for 4 hours. Um, you can dream in a fashion, which is their mental exercises, which become reflexive after years of practice. It's called, the elves call it the reverie. And you gain the benefits of 8 hours of rest with this 4 hour trance or the reverie. Elves know common and elvish by default. Elvish is rich and varied. Most bards learn elvish to have elvish ballads to put in their repertoires.
yeah, it's a very fluid race as far as the language goes. It's awesome. Now, for the elvish sub races, the high elf is the more common among the elves. They're usually kind of haughty and stuck up. There's the concept of the elves because they live so long. They view a lot of the younger races as kind of the obnoxious little cousins or brothers. Um, there is the collection of high elves, which is more relaxed and friendly, but the high elves, the upper echelon of the high elves, do have that kind of, well, You'll get over it, and if you don't, well, you'll die soon enough. It's not a big deal. Now, the high elves, in addition to having that dexterity, will also get an intelligence score increase by 1, and you get the elvish proficiency with longsword, short bow, and the longbow. Which the longbow advantage because most races do not get that right off the gate. As the high elf, you also know one cantrip from the wizard spell list and get an extra language of choice. It does not matter what class you are. If you're a high elf, you get a wizard spell, the cantrip, right off the bat. Boom. Now, wood elves, they tend to be born and raised in the woods. They're my personal
Hence their
favorite.
name.
Yeah, it's not. Who would have thought? They're my personal favorite because they do get a bonus to their wisdom, and that lends to you have to be a bit more perceptive in the woods. So that translates right there. They also move slightly faster. They get 35 feet per round instead of the 30. They have the same skill with the weapons, but they're also able to hide within the lightest of natural phenomena. Even heavy rain, light bushing, a little bit of snow. Wood elves are experts. If there's any possibility that they can hide actions available to them. Now, for the Drow. The Drow are a subrace that were exiled from the main High Elves for generations for worshipping the goddess Loth. She guided them down a path of evil and darkness. So they built their own civilization in a land that is now known as the Underdark. The Underdark isn't a pleasant place to be. And the Drow fit in just fine, for the most part. Drow adventures are extremely rare. Please check with your DM before playing them. I know if you've read any sort of Dungeons & Dragons lore, there's one in every group that wants to be Drizzt Do'Urden. Don't. 1, incredibly rare. 2, he's beyond exceptional even by adventurer standards. Arguably the most well-written and world-renowned character in Dungeons & Dragons history, and I wish my swords would come in for him. First Texas snowstorms. Anyway. So, if they allow it, your Drow would get a +1 to Charisma. Your Dark Vision would have an extended range of up to 120 feet, but you will have a disadvantage in sunlight for any perception checks involving sight. You will have proficiency with hand crossbows, rapiers, and short swords, as well as having the Dancing Lights cantrip, as well as getting more magic as you level up. Dancing Lights being replaced with Fairy Fire, so on and so forth. There's a few things. While the Drow can give you a nice little flair to it, it is important to emphasize again, they are extremely rare as adventurers.
Now we're going to my favorite, one of my other favorite races, and it's because I love the halflings, and I'm actually playing my first halfling now, a halfling ranger. I've not played one. The halfling is the D&D version of the Hobbit. They have a special place in most everyone's heart, and sometimes in our backpacks.
They're little pocket people.
They're little pocket people. They are small, like childlike small. We're talking about 3 feet tall, and they weigh around 40 to 50 pounds. Because of this, most races find them mostly harmless, and they also tend to avoid all the big wars. They're known to be kind, curious, and full of so much joy that you could probably bottle it and sell it in the market.
I'm sure many a alchemist has tried.
Yes, yes. And also, due to their size, they blend in really well. But it's more than just their appearance. They find themselves at home easily in groups of humans, dwarves, and elves. For the most part, halflings live peaceful lives. They don't have any sort of nobility or strict governmental structure. They instead look to the family elders for major decisions. The halfling adventurers are normally looking to defend their community, support their friends, or just generally explore, like my little halfling ranger who is just out to explore.
Halflings do get a +2 to their dexterity, and they reach maturity around 20 years old, and live about 2 centuries. Mostly lawful good in their alignments, tending to follow laws and seek the best in those around them. As said earlier, they're about 3 feet tall and weigh around 40 to 50 pounds, which means you are a small-sized creature. One of 2 small-sized creatures in the basic Player's Handbook races. Now, because of this, Halfling's movement speed is 25 feet naturally. Halflings are also naturally lucky, so anytime that you would roll a d20 for attack, skill check, saving throw, and you roll a 1 in it, so you would clearly fail, they get to re-roll that die, but you must use that new roll. There is no limit to how many times you can do that per day, so if you're just having really bad rolls and you hit 1 6 times on 6 different checks, you can re-roll that. Caveat: if you roll a 1 twice in a row, you still roll a 1. That's it. You don't get to re-roll the second roll.
Mhm.
That's that whole must use the new roll.
Mhm.
They're also very brave, which I guess you'd have to be at 3 feet tall. So they do get an advantage on saving throws against fear. You also get to move through the legs of any creature bigger than you, so most characters cannot move through enemies. They can move through allies in combat, but they can't move through enemies. Halflings can. They just can't end in the same spot. So there are some advantages to being small. You get to speak Common and Halfling, which isn't a secret language, but most other races won't know it. It's just one of those things that are kind of kept within their community. There's no written language for Halflings, it's all oral. And there are 2 sub-races that you can be as a Halfling.
The first one is actually my favorite. That of the two, I adore the Lightfoot halflings. They focus on stealth, which is helpful for a ranger, um, and they also get along with most anyone. To highlight this, get a shiny extra charisma point um, when you choose the Lightfoot. You
Charisma better be
also,
shiny.
yeah, you also get to um, you also get the hide action with only other creatures as your cover. So if my big barbarian friend is standing there and I want to hide, I can just step behind him and I'm hidden. So the Lightfoot, I like them. The other one is probably more what Samwise Gamgee is, and that's a stout halfling. They're hardier than your average halfling. They get a bonus to their constitution, and they get an advantage on saving throws against poison, as well as resistance to poison damage.
And it's kind of odd they don't get more diversity with their sub-races compared to some of the others, but
Mhm.
the Halflings get such a different advantage in general that you don't need a whole lot of diversity between the two. It's
Right.
basically, okay, do I want to be a Halfling that's super sneaky or a Halfling that, is going to be up in front? You
Mhm.
get it both ways. But this then leaves us with the dwarves. Oh, the dwarves. Everyone's
Love them.
favorite cranky uncle of the D&D world. They're stout, they're hardy, they have long memories and longer grudges. Their opinion lasts as long as their crafts, which can be a long time. They live between 4 or 500 years, which can give them a very different perspective than most of the other races, with the exception of the elves. The elves are the only race that lives longer than they do among the common races, not counting dragons. Dwarves and elves are really kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, where elves embrace an ever-changing nature, change with the seasons. The dwarves enjoy following methods, laws, building. They are as staunch as the stone. They are far more lawful than chaotic. Both tend towards good and towards being the operative word, but you will find them even in the other side spectrum, they will lean more towards the lawful than the chaotic.
And they also tend to operate in their societies as clans or vast kingdoms. Most everyone that I know who's ever played a dwarf usually speaks with a Scottish accent because of the clan thing. Their kingdoms stretch deep beneath the mountains, where the dwarves mine ores and gems for their intricate crafts. Dwarves dislike boats, um, or basically seafaring in general. So sea trade is handled more by humans and the halflings on their behalf. The chief unit of their society is their clan. To become clanless is actually a fate worse than death to most dwarves.
Most dwarves, because of the elves' more chaotic nature, they don't trust an elf. Um, Not that they hate them, it's just, I'm not gonna trust my important things for you. I'll have you by my side, combat, but I don't trust you with my money. Um, and your typical dwarf adventurer, they will be out for treasure or for the own sake of adventure. Sometimes for a specific need, maybe an altruistic reason. They also tend to often be on the command of the god, usually Helm or Ormil. There's a lot of the lawful good gods that they tend to follow. You will often see them as clerics or paladins. Um, they lend very easily into the churches. They also have gone to adventure to restore honor to their clan or redeem themselves after being exiled.
Um, Dwarves get +2 to their constitution. They mature around 50, and they live roughly 350 to 500 years. So they mature a little slower than the other races do, um, and they live again, like Kestrel said, um, slightly less than the elves, and they are more likely to be lawful than any other type of alignment. They stand between 4 and 5 feet tall. They weigh around 150 pounds and are considered medium size. They walk 25 feet per round, um, but they're also not slowed by heavy armor. They're pretty tough race. They
Strongest
have
endurance out of any of them.
uh, they have they have dark vision like the elves do, and they're resistant to poison. And we'll cover um, later all of that when we talk about combat. Um, they are naturally skilled artisans. You can choose smith, brewer, or mason's tools to have a skill in. Um, they also are proficient with the battle axe, the hand axe, the light hammer, and the warhammer. And there are two main playable subraces of dwarf.
That's right. The Mountain Dwarf, not to be confused with Mountain Dew, and it is actually the taller of the two, and oddly enough, the less common one. They are stronger, giving you a +2 to strength, and they're proficient with light and medium armor, regardless of the class. The mountain dwarves tend to reside more inside the caves of their kingdoms, not venturing out as often. Then there are the Hill Dwarves, which have much keener senses and better resilience. So it does increase their wisdom by 1, and they do get 1 additional hit point per level, which is a nice little thing to have in there. The Hill Dwarves you will see more commonly having their kingdoms and families on top of the mountains as opposed to inside of them. It's a minor thing. For backstory purposes, the Mountain Dwarves are more likely to become in contact or direct conflict with goblins. Whereas Hill Dwarves, anyone will become in contact. I've seen a lot of Hill Dwarves recently in backstories I've been talking with folks about, with either Orc or Gnoll tribes that their clan was getting a lot of fighting with.
Mm-hmm. So, there you have the 4 most common races in Faerun. And next week, I'm really looking forward to this because my all-time favorite race is going to be talked about next week. We'll go over the next 4, the more uncommon races of the Player's Handbook. Until then, I'm Tim Gwaine.
And I'm Kesper McKnight. This has been Pillars of Adventuring. May the rolls be ever in your favor.